Okay, so somebody asked on stream the other day, is now a good time to begin playing World of Warcraft for the first time? And I think Battle for Azeroth is a very good opportunity to begin World of Warcraft, and there's lots of reasons why that's the case. I think it's a better time to jump into the game than any of the previous expansions, going back to maybe the first 3. Now, I'm a big fan of vanilla, so I think if you want the original best experience that gets you into World of Warcraft, it's playing vanilla. So that would be playing on a private vanilla server or waiting until Blizzard releases vanilla servers, but that's not appealing to a lot of people to play on, a semi-legal or illegal server, depending on your point of view with that. So let's talk about Battle for Azeroth and some of the qualities and some of the things that you can expect if you were considering jumping into World of Warcraft right now. The first thing that you need to understand is World of Warcraft is essentially 2 different games with 2 different objectives. The first game is the leveling game, where you begin a character and your character gains power and moves through content by leveling up, by gaining levels. And each time you gain a level, you gain various stats, you gain new skills that allow you to better conquer the challenges of the game. Once you reach maximum level, and right now it's level 120, which sounds like a lot, but it's not as much as you think. Once you get to maximum level, then you have what's called endgame. And endgame is about gaining power through acquiring gear, acquiring armor that you put on your character and better weapons, which allow you to conquer higher and higher level difficulty challenges, including raids, which are group-based encounters that use larger numbers of people, say 10 to 25, as opposed to dungeons, which are the primary group activity that you'll engage in when you're leveling. Older versions of the game, like the vanilla or basically anything before Wrath or BC, contained a lot of stuff in the open world, what we call the open world, which is not a dungeon, an instance dungeon, that required groups, but that's been mostly eliminated from the game. So now the primary group activity you'll engage in when you're leveling is dungeons. And right now you can queue for dungeons, which means you open up an interface, you enter into a list of people, the computer assembles a list of people with all the roles necessary to do the dungeon, then you're transported into the dungeon where you can play with the other 4 people, get some quality items, some higher quality items than what you usually get from questing, and then get some experience as a result of finishing the dungeon, and then you can move on with whatever you want to do. Right now, in Battle for Azeroth, the leveling experience is probably going to be pretty fun and pretty good for people who are new to the game. The first reason is that World of Warcraft has always been very good at getting your feet wet rather slowly. So when you begin the game at level 1, there's some really basic tutorials that teach you the basics of playing the game. I actually think it'd be better if you went and played like vanilla for 5 levels, because it's even simpler and slower than what you get with retail WoW, but you don't have to do that. The second reason I think leveling in Battle for Azeroth is going to be a lot of fun for new players is because of a change that they made in Legion, which allows the zones to scale. So the game is broken up into a variety of different zones, and each zone has a little bit of a story that goes with it these days. And you can do the zones now in any order, as long as you're within a really broad level range. So if you wanted to do Westfall and you're playing Alliance, you could do it between any level of 10 and 60. This is really good because it allows you to do what zones you're attracted to as a player and skip the zones that you don't want to do. And it allows you to really stay in the zone and complete all the stories that are in the zone and all the quests that are in the zone before moving on. One of the things that's happened over the years is as we've added levels onto the game, the amount of experience required to gain each level has been necessarily decreased. Otherwise, it would take ages to get to 120 if they had never nerfed the experience from 1 to 60. So because of that shrinking of experience with each level, when you have a zone that has a specific level range, you can very quickly end up out-leveling the zone, where you're too high a level to get efficient experience from the monsters that are in it, you're too high a level to get efficient experience from the quests that are in it, and the items that you get from the quests are going to be too low a level. So not only does the zone scale, but the rewards scale, just like they would in a game like Oblivion, where depending on what level range you are when you complete the quest, it will give you an item that's leveled up to your level. So you're not really wasting any time. You're not losing out on the gear that you need to increase the power of your character, and you're not losing out on the time that you would need to level efficiently. This also lets you level multiple characters and have different experiences for each. So if you do the first character, maybe you roll a human, you do Elwyn Forest, you do Westfall, you do Duskwood, and you do Stranglethorn Vale, and then you're ready to go out and you can choose whether you want to do Outland or Northrend, because there's a 20 level range that covers both of those expansions and those areas of zones. And then you could do either Pandaria or go and do some zones from the Cataclysm expansion, and before you know it, you're leveled up into the later expansions. And then if you roll another character, maybe you do a dwarf, well, you can do the dwarven areas, you can do wetlands, Wrathy Highlands, or you can go down and do the human areas again, or pick and choose which ones you want to do. So each leveling experience can be unique and different and fun, and also it's not going to feel like you're out in leveling land for ages and ages before you go off and you're into some new lore area that's a little bit more interesting. Now, the third reason I think a lot of players will have fun with Battle for Azeroth is sort of tangential to the second reason, and that has to do with the Dungeon Finder. The Dungeon Finder is a design decision that I'm not crazy about for broader reasons, but which works within this context. And it works with scaling. So as you queue in for dungeons, you can get into a variety of dungeons within a broad level range, which lets you pick and choose from a large number if you want to be in specific dungeons and try out specific pieces of content, or just gives you a huge variety of dungeons that you get to do if you enjoy doing that. So if you decide to roll a class like a healer that focuses on healing people, you really could level up doing exclusively dungeons and not see the same one very many times. So, Dead Mines, for example, it's any player between about level 15 and level 60 can get queued into that particular instance, and the loot scales up with you, so you're never wasting your time. That's a big one. You're never going to feel like your time is wasted getting crappy gear or not gaining efficient experience. Now, the fourth reason I think new players would enjoy getting into Battle for Azeroth doesn't have to do with that leveling game. It has to do with the end game. And that's because at the beginning of an expansion, there's a lot less catch-up that you have to play compared to other points in an expansion. So if you were to begin now, you were to level pretty efficiently over a couple of weeks and get to end game. Yes, you're behind most of the people who've been playing right at launch, but it's not that hard to catch up. You do dungeons, you get items. Once you get a certain number of good items, you go on, you do heroic dungeons, you get better items, then you can do raids and get better items, and honestly, you won't be that far behind the other people who are playing the game. In fact, once you get to a certain item level, the rest of the time that you spend raiding and doing mythic dungeons or whatever content that you want to do, it's to chase down one or two item upgrades because the rest of your items are really good. So if you're in a position where most of your items are not good, almost every piece that you get is immediately usable. There's a bit of a curve that happens where you're gaining lots of gear and then it kind of levels out and you're not able to find a lot of upgrades over time. So if you're getting into it at the beginning of an expansion or towards the beginning, honestly, there's not that much catching up that you have to do, and you're going to feel really efficient because you're going to get lots of items that you can just put on and use. And over the years, they've made a lot of changes to the way itemization works. So if you're a new player, there's really not a lot of thinking you have to do when you get an item. You can just put it on and use it rather than having to think about a lot of different theory crafting stuff that existed in earlier versions of the games, like figuring out hit percentage, figuring out crit percentage, figuring out exactly how much haste you needed to have a certain effect happen, exactly how much mastery you needed. Even before there was mastery, there was weapon skill and things like that. So you don't have to worry about any of that. Pretty much if you get a piece of gear and it's better, you just put it on if it's higher item level. And that's a pretty easy way to make your character have an accelerated growth curve. And then you can be more or less within just a couple of item levels of the people who really hit the expansion hard at the beginning and had a level 110 ready to go and leveled up to 120 within a couple of days and began doing, So in other words, you won't be that far behind, even though you're starting very far behind. The nature of the curve means that you're going to converge with the others fairly quickly. Now, there are some things that I think could really stand in the way of a brand new player to World of Warcraft fully enjoying and fully being immersed in the experience. And foremost among these problems is the community or player interactions in general. It can be a somewhat isolated experience to just level in the World of Warcraft. You don't really need to group up with other people. You don't really need to interact with other people. And lots of people that are out just leveling in zones will not really talk to you and won't really want to group up with you. And this is in contrast to earlier versions of the game where there was a big advantage to grouping up with people because the content out in the open world was significantly more difficult than it is today. Likewise, if you queue into a random dungeon, you're going to be playing with random people. People you're probably never going to see again, people you're probably never going to form an attachment with, and people who probably aren't going to talk to you. And in fact, if you're a new player and you're not really certain with what you're supposed to do in dungeons, you can run into people who are really, really unkind. I still think about 90 to 95% of the people who play the game are actually very nice and would help you if you ask them, but that 5% can be really, really toxic. And one of the things that happens is when you depersonalize these sorts of relationships in group games, it allows people to be cruel and to be annoying in ways that they would never normally be face-to-face, in the way that they would never normally be if they were playing an earlier version of the game, say vanilla, where there were consequences, there were social consequences to their actions. If you were a jerk in the original version of World of Warcraft, you could get in a position where essentially no one would invite you to their guild, no one would group with you. There were consequences to being a jerk. Those consequences really aren't there with the dungeon finder, so you may get people that kick you out of dungeons or just are in general jerks. Now that being said, I actually think Battle for Azeroth represents one of the best opportunities to overcome the depersonalization of World of Warcraft and actually enjoy a community rather than be tormented by it. One of the things that you can do, and one of the things that I encourage you to do, is to join a social guild early on in the game. You can now find a guild through the user interface, and indeed, guilds can find you. You may get a lot of random guild invites early on in the game, like level 1, level 2, you'll be getting guild invites. I encourage you not to take those invites, but instead to wait a few levels, get your feet wet, and then try to find a guild that has a lot of people online, that has a lot of social interaction going on. And you can figure out if people are leveling in a guild by typing /who and then the name of the guild. It'll show you a list of all the people that are in the guild that are online. And if you see a lot of people that are online and they're not max level, that means they're leveling. It might be a good opportunity if you can get into that guild to get to know some people. And because of the scaling of content, both in zones and in dungeons, you have a much better opportunity to actually play the game with people that are in your guild rather than just have a green chat. It used to be that joining a social guild meant that you just got a green chat in your chat log rather than a group of people to play with because things didn't scale. Everybody would be such a radically different level that they really couldn't play together, but that's not the case anymore. Now, as long as you're within a pretty broad range, you can play with other people in your guild, and that's going to really help you develop the personal relationships that are necessary to make the game fun and manageable once you get to endgame and there's a higher level of complexity and difficulty involved in the content. Having a good solid group of people to play with who can help you improve your skills, who can give you tips, who are maybe more experienced than you, is also going to help you avoid what I call the newbie cliff. The newbie cliff is the very profound difficulty difference between the content that you engage in while leveling and the content that you engage in once you get to max level. Now, in the distant past, this sort of cliff didn't exist, and that's because the content in general for leveling was more difficult, but it also ramped up quite a bit towards the end of the leveling experience to get you prepared for harder content. Nowadays, with zone scaling and with dungeon scaling, you have one set difficulty which is rather low, and then you get to max level and there's a big jump. So, overall, I think it's a great time to jump into World of Warcraft, the retail version, if you've never played before. It's probably the best opportunity to enjoy the leveling experience compared to the past. It's a much more straightforward and simple leveling process where you don't have to think so much about how you're going to find gear, how you're going to get to that next level, what zones you have to do in what order. You can really just play the game and enjoy it for what it is, access the content in whatever order you want. Indeed, there's never been more access to the stories that are in World of Warcraft than there has been before, even at endgame. That being said, the game's really all about endgame. And before you begin playing World of Warcraft, you need to consider how much time you'd be willing to put into the game once you get to max level and what that game is going to look like for you. There's a whole lot of different levels that you can play at it in game. You can play in a much more casual way, which is mostly how I play because I'm a pretty busy guy. I intend to raid about one night a week, which is totally doable for most people if you're engaged in the normal and heroic modes. If you're interested in doing the highest difficulty content, you need to clear several nights a week to play the game, and that's not going to be appropriate for everybody. So decide how much time you're willing to play, and there's probably something for you to do it in game. But it's good to think about it ahead of time, because you don't want to get to max level and say, well, I only have 1 hour twice a week to play, because that's going to really limit what experience potential you have there. Raiding generally takes several hours, so you need to have at least one chunk of several hours to play during the week if you want to access raids, even really Raid Finder stuff, which is the lowest difficulty raids that exist. Now, before I leave you, let me say a few things about player versus player combat, which is something that I really enjoy in World of Warcraft. There's two different ways that you can access PvP, as we call it right now. One way is in the open world by turning on war mode, and the other way is through battlegrounds, and each one has a different flavor to it. Open world, it's a lot more chaotic, it's unexpected. You may see horde, you may not. You get a bonus for leveling with war mode on right now, so I would almost recommend it because of scaling. You'll actually match the difficulty of the other player, but if you find it too intense, you can always go back to a capital city and turn off war mode. Yes, you lose a 10% experience buff, but if you're getting killed all the time, you're still going to be ahead of the game even without that 10% experience. So it's up to you whether you want to do it. I recommend you try it out, and if you don't like it, you can always turn it off, and you can always try more structured PvP in battlegrounds. That may be more your flavor. You can level a little bit better with battlegrounds now, but most people tend to play the battlegrounds at maximum level. So keep that in mind. Hope you have a great day. Thanks for listening. Leave me your thoughts down below in the comment section, and I will see you guys next time.